if you're standing in the middle of the room and on one side of the room is all your problems scattered around, and on the other side of the room is Jesus. He said, you can either face all your problems and try to manage them, but they're coming at you in all these different ways, right? They're like wild animals. Or you can just turn and face Jesus and let him do that for you. And so my beginning of my journey to Jesus was in this acknowledgement, I could just turn to him and a little bit just release the outcomes and trust him, right? I mean, it's as simple as it could be, but that was really helpful to me.
You're listening to the Ferment Podcast, conversations about worship and transformation. Today's guest is Caleb Maskell. Caleb is the founder of the Society of Vineyard Scholars, a doctoral student at Princeton Divinity School, and the worship pastor at the Blue Root Vineyard outside Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. This episode is brought to you by Monk Drums. Monk Drums is a creative desert venture that strives to combine beauty and business as one heartbeat. Monk Drums' main focus is handcrafted wooden drums that allow us to love, assist, and serve all who accompany us on this path. Use the coupon code FERMENTPOD to get 5% off your Monk Drums order. Find them on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Monk Drums. And every Monday, look for hashtag Monk Drum Monday. Speaking from personal experience, monk drums are wonderfully crafted and they sound amazing. They blend the best traits of both the djembe and the cajon, and I found them to be incredibly versatile in both the live and studio environment. Check them out at monkdrums.com. This episode is brought to you by our friends at worshipteam.com. Worshipteam.com comes preloaded with over 12,000 songs, and new songs are being added all the time. Songs from Hillsong, Bethel, Vineyard, Six Steps, Jesus Culture, just to name a few. Service building with Worship Team is a snap, and all the songs are completely legal and licensed. Visit them at worshipteam.com today for a free trial. Complete worship planning with thousands of songs, easy interface, mobile apps, and legal rights for your church. All you need in one place, worshipteam.com.
Ferment Podcast listeners, my name's Mike O'Brien, the director of the Vineyard School of Worship. SS15 is your code for 15% off the Vineyard School of Worship Sound Summit. It's happening January 31st through February 2nd, 2019 at the Delaware City Vineyard near Columbus, Ohio. This is a perfect event for your sound tech. If you've yet to make an investment through a conference or through outside training, this will be the event you want to send them to. The conference cost is incredibly affordable, and we're including several host homes, first come, first serve. We're going to learn about the art and science of sound. We're also going to learn about the relational components of sound, how to build a team, and how to speak to one another. It will be helpful on many levels. Sign your tech up, sign a musician up, sign a worship leader up. There will be something for everybody. Use the code SS15 at registration. Go to vsow.org to register.
All right, everybody. I've got a great guest for you today. This is one of my good friends, Caleb Maskell. He is with us this afternoon. Caleb and I are in Speculator, New York.
Beautiful Speculator.
That's right. If you don't know where that is, you're in good company because I don't know where that is either, but we're here. Anyway, before I let Caleb talk, I want to give you a brief idea of who Caleb is. Caleb is the worship leader staff pastor at Blue Root?
Yeah, worship pastor.
Yeah, worship pastor. But then Caleb also is the founder, runner, originator of Society of Vineyard Scholars.
Yep, also true. Yep.
Yeah, Caleb, is there anything else we should throw in there?
I'm finishing a PhD at Princeton right now in American religious history. I'm hoping not to have that on my tombstone.
Yes.
Is finishing a PhD.
That's right.
And so that I'm hoping to be done with this year. And no, I suppose that's it. I'm married to Kathy and have 2 kids.
And Kathy's no slouch.
Oh, no, Kathy
She's
is no
powerhouse.
slouch. Yeah, exactly. She is got a lot going on. Leads Vineyard Justice Network and is pastor of discipleship at Blue Root Vineyard, where we're at just outside Philadelphia.
Yeah.
And that's
great.
That's us.
Okay. So the idea behind this podcast is just really it's rooted in the metaphor or the image of fermentation, and it's the idea that things change.
Mm-hmm.
They start one way and they go somewhere, you know, and there's outside influences that are involved, And so I guess I want to begin this afternoon, and I would love to hear from you about a moment or moments of spiritual transformation. ways in which you used to be one thing, but it became something else, you know? And especially if it ties into your actual life in some way, because we're finding that there's usually a story that's involved in spiritual transformation.
Mm-hmm. Gosh, every day involves that slow, incremental change for me, right? Where like, oh man, I just wish I was different. How does change happen, right? But then you have that experience of constantly wanting to be different, but then looking back on a year or a 5-year period and being like, wow, how did I get here?
Yeah.
From there, right?
Yeah.
So change is like slow and fast at the same time.
Yeah, that's been a theme that's shown up several times. Is it's the idea that in the moment by moment, it seems like nothing is happening.
Totally.
But then if we get any perspective at all, we see we're totally different people.
Absolutely.
Things have changed.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, okay, so let me just redirect maybe for a second. What has changed in the last 5 years?
I mean, it's so interesting to think about change because I'm like a person. I'm probably an idealist, and I see like down the road, right? I see down the road, and like sometimes like around the corner, and I'm also the kind of person who makes like leaps in my head, like, oh, we could just do this and that and this and that. I'm the guy where the teacher would say, you have to show your work on your math homework. And I'd be like, no, but the answer is just this.
Yeah.
Right. And so I feel like over the last several years, I've been in a process where God has been building in me some vision for what kinds of things we need in the church to become like a hospitable, thoughtful place that develops leaders and welcomes people of all kinds in the 21st century, right?
Yeah.
Like I've realized that churches, really all churches, but churches like ours, we need to be developing, cores for theological reflection. We need to be developing like a core understandings of like why we do what we do on the weekends, stuff like that, right? And these kind of really long range projects, right? We're in the Vineyard Church, and how do we think about the Vineyard's identity, and how do we think about transferring the identity of a movement that had its beginnings 40 years ago, and its first generation gals mostly beginning to retire. Yeah. Right. What does it look like to be the Vineyard for a long time? And so those are the kinds of things where it's like God, I think, has just made me the kind of person who thinks that way, thinks in like the long arc, and that requires some building, right? But the process of even coming to articulation of what we need, much less beginning to build that stuff. And, I've found it to be a rather long and, painful at times, but it's not mostly characterized by pain. It's mostly characterized by, wow, I'm putting one foot in front of the other, following my instincts, asking for a lot of wisdom from pretty much everyone who's around, anyone who will talk to me, and then just putting brick upon brick, stone upon stone, and asking God, not like what's the whole plan, but what's the next thing. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I guess what I'm interested in now after hearing you say that would be this, because the last few times that you and I've talked together, we've talked about these big picture issues, right?
For sure.
Because we're sort of like in the thick of trying to lead this next corner.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I guess I'm interested in hearing you talk maybe a little bit about why that question or that set of questions has awakened in your own heart.
Yeah. Well, it might be something to do with having kids. So I've got a 9-year-old and a 2-year-old. And, Kathy and I planted a church with another couple in New Haven, Connecticut in 2007. Elm City Vineyard, and we didn't have kids then. But in the process of having kids, which, Josiah came along shortly after we planted the church, I began to be more and more aware that there's a whole generation of people growing up in the vineyard who have only known the vineyard, right? And it used to be that people who not only led vineyard churches, but even showed up in vineyard churches had very often had some kind of background in another church, right? So the vineyard's form, like the vineyard's church form, is kind of like a renewal form, right? It's a form.
Because it includes everybody else.
Totally. It builds on other stuff that you've had in the background, right? So you can come in and you can sing songs to Jesus for 30, 40 minutes because you've known about Jesus for a while. And this thing is a very renewing way of coming into Jesus' presence, sing, etc. But if that's your bread and butter, if the vineyard is all that you've known, right? It just raises a whole different set of questions about like, what are we teaching? What are we forming? How are we building, or not building disciples? Because I think God does the building, but how are we setting people up to become disciples in the ways that our structures work, in the ways that our institutions, to use like kind of a sometimes scary word for some folks. Wait, I don't know, build an institution. Well, the truth is, like, it could be like a small, flexible, lean institution, but every church is at some level an institution.
It eventually happens.
It's got an end goal.
Yep.
It's just what it is, right? You know, you got an end in mind and a thing to achieve it. So I think that's having kids is a big part of it. Just
and
watching.
So what about having kids has awakened maybe this set of questions?
Well, to realize that as a parent, you know, I'm responsible for my children's development and growth to a certain point, but you also realize, wow, you know, I mean, it's that, cliche that it takes a village to raise a child, right?
It absolutely does.
You got to find your village. You got to make sure your village is okay.
Yeah, it's a decent village.
Yeah. So it's a question of, for me, like, what's a good village?
Well, you know, and one of the things that I've noticed, and I'm clearly not a parenting expert.
No.
Just want to put that out there right there.
I'm not either.
You know, but I have kids who are 16, 14, 12, and 5. And Heather and I have talked many times about the fact that I don't know when it is, but there's this moment when you become very aware that your kids are making their own choices.
Mm-hmm.
Now, you know, they're still, you know, in your care. You still have a massive amount of influence over them.
Right.
You know, you can still guide and direct, but there's this thing that starts happening.
Mm-hmm.
12, 13, I don't know what it is, 10 for some kids.
Yeah.
And they're literally making their own choices.
Right.
And so, you know, to your point, the container, the bigger container that they rest inside, it's very important.
Well, and I think, we have to have churches that are able to face, able to positively engage with and embrace like the actual world that we actually live in, right? It's not going to do us any good if we're building communities that are designed for, you know, the renewal of 1980s evangelicalism. There's nothing wrong with where we've been, but where we're going looks really different.
Yeah.
You know, and I see that in my son now who's 9. I mean, he's facing stuff that didn't even come across the radar screen of folks, you know, 20, 30 years ago. And we just have to be active in our formation.
Well, I know it's certainly true of your kids, but it's also true of my kids. Like even River, my oldest, he was born in 2001. Like the internet was a thing.
Totally.
Like, so he's never had one breath in his life where the matrix wasn't running in the background.
Of course.
You know?
Dude, my 2-year-old knows how to use an iPad.
Of course she does.
I'm like, how did you even know? She's like, I'm watching videos, Daddy.
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, look at you. You are.
Yeah.
You totally are.
My 5-year-old has become a lizard expert from kids' YouTube because he can take Heather's phone and he'll shout into it, you know?
Yeah.
Bearded dragon. And then he watches all the videos, you know?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we just haven't, maybe as a church, maybe we've started to think about what are the effects of things like the internet.
Yeah.
But maybe we haven't thought deeply enough about that yet.
Well, yeah, I think there's just a kind of cultural competency that we need to develop as leaders in order to, in order to be real, right? I mean, we can pretend that we don't need those things and that business as usual will serve us well. But at the end of the day, people are going to go where they get the best interpretation of their life, right? I think that, when churches are being run well, when churches are quote unquote succeeding, or when people are drawn to a community, the reason they're drawn to a community is because it gives them the most plausible explanation and interpretation of the life that they're actually living, right? Jesus was so attractive because the stuff that he said, sometimes it was confusing, sometimes it was challenging, but it was also just full of truth, right? When Jesus talked about how things were, people sat up and listened, right? So I was thinking about like the people who were sitting around when the Pharisees were bugging him for healing somebody on a Sabbath. And he said, look, if your animal fell in a pit on the Sabbath, you'd pull it out, right? And everybody standing around was like, duh, of course we would. And those religious people just looked stupid. Mm-hmm. It wasn't like a strong theological argument. It was just like, this is life, guys.
Yeah.
And so I'm hoping that the work that I'm trying to do, Kathy's trying to do, a lot of us are trying to do right now, who love the vineyard and are being called into leadership in the vineyard, is about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you're a church person then.
I guess I am a church person.
Yeah, I mean, that's what I'm hearing.
Yeah.
It's so effervescent in you. You're a church person.
Well, I'm a structures person too. Like I just think we're so much more formed by the structures that we're in than we are normally aware of, right? I think when you walk into a restaurant or a movie theater or a mall or a cathedral or any of those places or a stadium, those places start to work on you. And in fact, they draw out of you things that are maybe latent in you, right? Like, I live in Philadelphia. Everybody's crazy about the Eagles, especially now, right?
Yeah,
because they won the Super Bowl. And, if you walk into Lincoln Financial Field, I mean, people become different in that place, especially if there's a game on, right? Because there's a sense of identity, collective power, all that, right? And that's not by accident. The building is not incidental to that. The building is central to that. And so to me, structures of all sorts, whether they're physical or, ideological or just the way we put things together, really matters.
Yeah. So Caleb, was there ever a time in your life when church or structure was not up on your radar?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, so I was raised in England. I grew up in England. My parents are British. I have 2 passports. And in England, my parents, they went to charismatic house churches. So they were sort of a mind that a lot of the institutional churches in the UK were like past their prime, and they weren't cynical, and they never talked bad about anybody, but they chose into these places because they thought, okay, like this is where the Holy Spirit's at work, and this is where we need to be, right? So we went to these churches which were, relatively unstructured in the sense that if the musical portion was. Someone would just start singing a song, and then they had like a pretty good like barrel house piano guy who would just pick up whatever the song was, and then we'd sing that song and then move on to another and another. And there was a teaching team, and they would sort of switch among the elders who was going to teach. And there was a kind of very decentralized power structure. And I think it would probably not be speaking ill of them to say that they didn't really think that they had structure or liturgy or anything. I think they thought.
Yeah, I think that's. We like to think that we don't.
Yeah, right.
Like, and not just those people, but I think we all like to think, we don't have a liturgy. We're not religious.
Right, exactly. I think that was part of the thing for them for sure. And it met in like a fellowship hall or a community center, unlike the other, old established church buildings that were all around the streets in England. You throw a stone, you hit a church building, right? Because they're 1,000 years old or whatever. And so I grew up in an environment that took itself to be pretty unstructured. And then we moved to the United States when I was 9. This is before the internet, right? So before Facebook. My parents had no way of really connecting with anybody, but certainly not with any other British people from there. So there was definitely a bit of an identity crisis that comes along with immigration, probably for most people. So they just went to the closest church down the street, which is a Southern Baptist church. And I remember the culture shock of that was really stark, right? Because that was very structured, very institutional. You had to put on your tie. I'd never dressed up for church before.
Really?
Dressed up for school, not for church.
That's really, of course, yeah. Yeah, your parents were taking you to home church.
Exactly. We were going to home church. So that was just what it was.
We're voting against that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was much more formal, and very culturally formal as well. There were a bunch of transplants. Actually, this is in New Jersey, but people who lived in the South and were up in New Jersey for work or whatever, they came from the South and had moved for work, would come. So it was really culturally Southern. And the songs and it was an interesting time. But I mean, long story short, it really didn't work for me, right? My grid for who God was so unrelated to what I was experiencing as a kid, 9, 10, 11 in that church, that when I went away to boarding school for high school, so I left and went to boarding school when I was 12, going on 13.
Wow.
And
in the United States.
In the United States,
okay.
Right? But there was no requirement for me at that point to go to church. This is a long way of answering your question about was I'm a church guy now, but was I always, right? And so there was a time from about 13 to 16 where I was really not connecting to church at all, except for when I went home and participated in the church where my parents were, that honestly I didn't really like that much. I had some friends there.
Yeah.
Hey guys, if you hear this, I like you.
Yeah.
But it was just not, it didn't help me to see God or know Jesus in a way that was...
Were you okay with God at this point? Or was God just sort of like, he's evaporated?
Well, it was an interesting thing. I felt I never really doubted the existence of God. That was just kind of a gift to me, I guess. And my parents had taught me the Bible when I was a kid, so I knew the Bible pretty well. But I definitely wasn't following Jesus. I wasn't trying to be like Jesus, and I guess I don't know that I was okay. It was a pretty lonely time, actually. I think I was working a lot out in that season of my life. And I mean, any kid who goes away to boarding school, especially at that age, is working stuff out.
Yeah, and you had immigrated.
And you'd immigrated.
Yeah, it's everything stacking on top of itself.
Exactly. I had a bunch of big questions. And so in some ways, it was a time for reinvention. I kind of went to the floor. Everything got stripped out. And then I just started to figure out who I was. And so... I guess if you had asked me in that day, like, does God love you? I would have been like, yeah, God loves me. But I didn't have a prayer life or any particular sense of connection to God.
And so what awakened a connection to God and then...
Well, I mean...
Then into church,
Yeah, there's a couple things. I mean, high school was a pretty painful experience for me. I failed a bunch of classes and
That's interesting to hear you say, because you're one of the smartest people I know.
Yeah, well, I mean, it wasn't about being smart. It was about the fact that in order to do the work that was being asked of me, I needed motivation. And I had no motivation. I was like a Green Day song. So my freshman year, I did badly in school, and I had a scholarship, and they took my scholarship away, which is what, I think I was just sending up like flares to my parents, bring me home.
Yeah.
Like, I just need to be home.
Yeah.
And they were doing their very best. And we've talked about this a bunch. So I have no ill will or even really much pain around it at this point. But, they thought would be best for me was like, we're going to support you. We know you can do this. We're going to get you through it. Right. So I went back, still going. And I had this moment. My dad was a productivity consultant.
Wow.
And he came to my school and he brought me like a binder like with a calendar in it. And he's like, man, all you really need to do is just organize your days, right? He's like, if you could just get some structure in your day, that'll
fix everything.
It'll fix it. And it was so kind. I mean, I look back, I feel so warm towards him for doing this, right? So I got this binder and he's showing me how I could use it and whatever. And I'm like, yeah. And then he left. And I literally remember this moment. I'm in my dorm room in Kennedy House at the Lawrenceville School. And my dad drove off and I watched him drive away. And I had this moment, because remember, I knew the Bible, where I was like, oh, I'm the dude at the end of Romans 7. The things I want to do, I cannot do. I want to do this.
Yeah.
But I know that I am not going to be able to do this. The things that I don't want to do, that's what I'm doing.
That's the very thing
And then I walked across the street to the pizza shop and was kind of a little bit like in a crisis, because I'm like, I want to do this. I want to please my parents. I want to kick butt in school. I want to go to a good college. I want to do all that stuff, but I can't. And I don't really know why. So my journey to God, my journey to Jesus, and I maybe journey back to Jesus, that depends how you want to think about it, I guess, was rooted in failure, right? My friend David Zoll, who runs the blog Mockingbird, has this wonderful thing that he says, love is not a thing that you fall into, it's a thing that you fail into, right? Because it's really only in the place where you absolutely come apart that the reality of love can be communicated to you.
Who still accepts you at the bottom.
Exactly. And I think my first several years in high school were that working itself slowly out like a slow motion car accident.
Yeah, and your parents, they stood with you through it all.
Oh, they stood with me through it all. I mean, I told you I lost my scholarship. I was very much not like the rich kid who goes to boarding school. My mom actually went out and got a job, and I think her whole salary probably went to paying my school fees, which is crazy.
Yeah.
But to me, like whatever else that was a total picture of grace, And so I'll always be grateful to her for what she showed me in that. But it didn't help me to do my work.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so basically what I found was that I was as supported as I could possibly have been at some level in terms of material things, but no better off in terms of what I could do. And so a couple of things happened on my journey to Jesus. I mean, one was, so I went home, and this church we were a part of, the one I didn't really connect with, the thing that I did connect with that they did was they had these summer camps, and you kind of go away for a week with your youth group, right? So I went on this trip with a youth group, and, mostly it was about playing guitar and talking to girls for me. But the time that I went after my 11th grade year, so before my senior year, I met a guy, it's kind of a classic story. Like I had a camp counselor who was seemed like a real dude to me. I was like, wow, this he's different. He tells the truth. He's no stranger to struggles. He's someone I can relate to. He's kind of like punk rock. And he's from Florida. His name was Mike Kwiatkowski. I don't know. I'm amazed I can remember that. Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. The Floridian guy. I mean, we haven't been in touch ever.
Yeah.
But I just remember him. And I was like, man, if this guy is like what a Jesus follower is, I could kind of be like this guy. And we talked. We had a couple really powerful conversations. And I remember I asked him, I was like, man, I just feel like my life is just coming to pieces in the 11th grade way, right? I don't know if I'm going to go to college. I don't know how to work hard. Everybody has expectations of me. I don't know how to meet them. I feel like I'm wasting my potential. All, the things that 11th grade kids worry about maybe. And if they're in my situation, I don't know. I don't know how paradigmatic I am. But this dude is like, well, you can think about it this way. If you're standing in the middle of the room and on one side of the room is all your problems scattered around, and on the other side of the room is Jesus. He said, you can either face all your problems and try to manage them, but they're coming at you in all these different ways, right? They're like wild animals. Or you can just turn and face Jesus and let him do that for you. And I was like, whoa, dude, that's kind of helpful. And so my beginning of my journey to Jesus was in this acknowledgement, I could just turn to him and a little bit just release the outcomes and trust him, right? I mean, it's as simple as it could be, but that was really helpful to me.
Yeah, so he just preached the gospel to you in this.
In a way I could hear.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, I remember I drew it in my Bible, like a circle, and there's like me in the middle, and then all these dots of problems on one side and like a J on the other side.
Yeah.
And it's like, which way do you want to point? It was really helpful for me. So I went back to school, and my plan was, I'm going to work hard, I'm going to pray, I'm going to live a clean and upstanding life, and I'm going to get into college. And a couple things happened. I worked hard. I didn't do as well as I thought I was going to do, even though I was working hard because, it was on a sliding scale. I didn't quite live the clean and straightforward life that I thought that I would, but I had an awareness that God was with me even in the middle of that, which was quite powerful. And I didn't get into college. Like I didn't have a good college option. So what I did was I repeated my senior year of high school and another boarding school, right? It's this thing that happens in boarding schools called postgraduate year. And it's usually for people who are like athletes. They're going to go play hockey in the NHL.
Gotcha.
So they go it's basically like a pre-college redshirt year for good athletes. And then there's like the one-off guy.
And you were him.
When I was that guy, because I had nothing to recommend me. You go to the admissions officer at the school and you say, I would like you to take a chance on me. I mean, I literally said that to this guy, and this guy did. And so I ended up at the school in Connecticut called Choate Rosemary Hall, which is real fancy. JFK went there. It was like, one of those New England places. And my parents asked me to go to the Christian Fellowship one time because I hadn't been to any fellowships at Lawrenceville. It wasn't part of my life. And they said, look, would you please just go one time to the fellowship? And I said, yeah, I'll go to the fellowship one time. So I walked in to the fellowship, the Christian Fellowship. And I remember I had just been signing up for a radio show. The school, one of the best things about the school is they had a radio station. And so I got a slot to play music for a couple hours. And I'd just been sorting that out. And then I walked over to the Christian Fellowship, feeling really kind of alien. Like, I don't want to be in this room. These people are probably all lame.
And you're a fifth-year senior.
I'm a fifth-year senior. I'm like, not up for this. And I walked into the back of the chapel at Choate, and I remember distinctly hearing music in the front. And it was literally almost like a supernatural experience. I felt like I was being drawn towards the front by the sound. And as I'm like walking towards the sound, I start to cry. And I'm like, what is happening to me? Like, I don't know what's happening to me right now. And I get to the front of the room, and there's some guys, relatively normal looking people, singing what I now know are vineyard worship songs, singing Arms of Love and Refiner's Fire, and songs that, I was like a music head. I was a rock and roll guy, still am. Thanks.
Yeah.
And I'll have that, please. But, it was not cool music, but it was powerful, and it was beautiful in a way that felt different from almost anything else that I'd really experienced. And I kept going back.
What's interesting to me, because I've heard not only you tell this story, but I've heard so many people tell a story that's similar to this. Mm-hmm. Especially the detail of like, I'm kind of a muso. I love music. I know what good music is.
Yeah.
And then I encounter these vineyard songs. It is not cool.
Yeah.
It is the opposite of cool.
Right.
Those Touching the Father's Heart recordings, they were so tremendously profound and powerful.
Yes.
But they're not cutting it. They were not cutting edge like sonic music. It wasn't like,
right.
Yeah.
No, totally.
But it's so, I don't know about you, but I just chalk that up to the work of the Spirit. Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so like the short version of the rest of that story is that I started to go to that fellowship, started to play music with that fellowship, discovered, like I could be a worship leader. So I started leading songs. And our group, I mean, a lot of people started to have the same kind of experience that I was having in our group that year, to the point where in a school of 1,000 people, I remember one time we had 100 people in the room. You think, gosh, that's a lot of people. And I remember I bought the Vineyard tape, Light the Fire Again, and The River Is Here. I had those 2 tapes, and I used to play those tapes on my Walkman and just walk around campus, sometimes early in the morning, sometimes late at night. And I would just cry. And why? I mean, it's interesting how like the emotional piece is a part of the story, because I wasn't like, I don't know, like seeing angels and having like supernatural experiences, but I think that God was healing me like in some way, like through the music.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it wasn't that the music itself was so great, although some of those songs are actually beautifully written.
They're perfect.
But it was that they were giving life to me by just telling me the heart of God.
Yeah.
Like over and over and over again, giving me prayers, right? Giving me little simple things to pray and say, there must be more.
Yeah.
Gosh, there's just so many.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I just love that. I love that the actual songs and that worship was a vehicle for like, or a catalyst for a brand new life.
Well, what I feel like happened, honestly, is that my parents had established something so good in me by teaching me the Bible, right?
Yeah.
But I had experienced the Bible plus a bunch of religion that I never felt at home in, right? I remember feeling a little bit scared in the charismatic house churches that I grew up in.
Yeah.
It was a little anarchic, and then feeling really alienated in the church, the Southern Baptist Church. It felt, the particular group, it just felt a little hostile to me. But what I got in that season of time in high school, at the end of high school, was a sense of relationship with the living God. And all of a sudden it was like the thing my parents had built in me with scripture and showing me their lives. It was like a machine that got plugged in.
Yeah.
Like God gave me the power. And all of a sudden it's like someone turned the lights on and turned the machine on.
Yeah. Yeah. Everything fell into place.
Dude, it just started to work.
Yeah.
And I realized, I distinctly remember realizing that year, this is going to characterize my whole life. Like there's no way back from this. What I have seen, what I've experienced, this is going to shape me forever.
Wow.
So how did I come to God? The trajectory, that's the inflection point.
Yeah.
Was that year at Choate in the Christian fellowship with some people I'm still dear friends with. Nobody was perfect. There wasn't like some great charismatic leader. There was a wonderful guy who took us to church and ran the meetings and so on. But end of the day, it was just a bunch of hungry people who didn't really have a roadmap, but knew reality when they saw it and just leaned towards it.
Yeah. So a few years of pain, feelings of alienation.
Yeah.
But it gets sort of like culminated in being able to feel the embrace of God through some worship.
Well, and
a group of people.
Yes, and I was I came into that spot with nothing to lose. I had nothing to lose. I wasn't known. I was like, I don't have anything to lose, and I have everything to gain by saying, God, if you're there, help me. And there was a bunch of moments throughout my life where I'd prayed that, even in the dark years in high school. God, show yourself to me, help me. And I think I would say that I saw some little signs, but this was the moment when that the Lord chose to say, you're mine.
I would love to hear you talk about just what you feel like the purpose of worship is,
Mm.
you know, especially as someone who's been deeply formed by worship,
Yeah.
and as someone whose sort of like reinitiation into the life of God and into the church was really catalyzed by worship.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I think it's absolutely fair to say that I'm a follower of Jesus today because of my initial experiences in worship and my ongoing relationship to worship. And when I say worship, I think that I at some level, I mean everything we do from when we open the doors to when we close the doors.
Yeah.
But like at the core, I mean the ability to come before God and sing with a group of people who also want to come before God, right? To me, when we worship, we're kind of always doing two things, right? We're always looking to encounter the living God. And then I think especially as we grow up and become a little reflective about what's happening, we're also looking to be formed by God, right? Certainly like worship leaders and pastors who are pastoring a worshiping community need to be aware that formation is a big part of what's happening when people are coming to worship, whether they know it or not.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think with encounters the first thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when I mean, still to this day, but for at least a year, if not 2 years after I just started to come back to Jesus or come to Jesus, got grasped by Jesus, I would just go to worship and cry. I mean, there was probably 5 or 6 times that I would worship God and not cry out of dozens, hundreds, because I felt loved by God.
Yeah, you were having some sort of an encounter with His presence.
I saw the goodness of God.
Yeah.
I heard the truth of belovedness and the journey that God is taking people on who want to go with Him,
Yeah.
And it never stopped being good. It was good news to me, right? And it wasn't just like the idea of good news. It was the experience of good news. I could tell you like, wow, there's power in that, right? And I think some of that's like inherent in the art of it. Some of that's inherent in the fact of the music, right? I mean, when you listen.
Well, and then also just the fact that we get to participate.
Well, for sure.
Right. Like it's strange. Like worship music declares, there's a sense in which worship music declares the truth, right? And we can experience that.
Right.
But it's an experience that because we're singing, we're actually entering into it.
Yes.
You know, it's something deeper than just, honestly, I am a preacher.
Yeah.
Right? In my soul, I'm a preacher.
Yeah.
But I think it's actually something that's maybe deeper than sermonizing.
Mm-hmm. Oh, totally. Well, I mean, it's really interesting to think about what it's like when we sing scripture, right? Because scripture is the word of God given to us, right? But then we sing it back to God, right? I think it's St. Augustine. Somebody says that that's one of the very few forms of true speech, right? Like the way that you speak the truth is you pray scripture back to God, right? I'm not remembering the reference on that. I think it was St. Augustine, but it's just an incredible thing to find yourself in a place that's inherently so much bigger than you, but of which you're absolutely intimately a part and desired and welcome, So, yeah, I mean...
So that's like the encounter part.
That's the encounter
And that's
part.
the initiation.
Yeah. And then there's the formation piece too. Exactly. So, I'm a worship pastor, and what I'm thinking about as people come in to my church is that every single person coming in there is on a journey, right? And my job is to be hospitable, to extend to them the hospitality of God as they walk through the door, right? Me and Kathy watched Downton Abbey when it was a thing, right? And, I always think of it like, God is like the Lord of the manor, right? And we're like the butler. We're the maitre d', right? It's my job to extend the hospitality of the Lord and do the work that enables that hospitality to have legs, right? Have hands and feet. And so people are coming in and they're on a journey. And what I want to do as a worship pastor is enable people wherever they are to move forward in their formation. And I think practically, like in a nutshell, what that looks like is to continually remind them of the story that they're in, right? That story has a few parts. The invitation and welcome of God, right? The confession of sin and God's pronouncement of their forgiveness, which has to come immediately following, right? In Scripture and in the liturgy of the church, when you confess your sin, you're forgiven, right? And we have to know when we're singing, we need to sing the forgiveness of God over people as we're also singing our confession. And then, the attributes of God. Obviously, there's lots of good songs that are about who God is. And then finally, the mission of God, right? God turns us outward to the world. And so
when you're even thinking of this, you're thinking in terms of even like set building and
I'm thinking about
and then even maybe your larger pastoral ministry.
Absolutely.
To your team.
Absolutely. I want people to know themselves in that story, right? And so there's some value in repetition, right? I mean, pretty much every week when we start church, I'll just pray, Jesus, we're here in response to your invitation. And I'm hoping that if people hear that 100 times, that will become an instinct, right? And, I would say this too. When I'm planning worship sets, I'm always thinking about the direction, about keeping people in the story that I just laid out: invitation, confession, forgiveness, God's heart, and then God's mission. But I'm also aware that in the telling of that story, in the iteration, Holy Spirit could come and might do wonderful things that are going to interrupt the flow of our formational plan. And we're going to lean towards that every time, right? Because the Lord is king. The Lord can do what the Lord wants to do. And so there's this kind of like back and forth, maybe you could call it tension, but I think for a once you've done it a few times, it's less of a tension. And
I think it's just relational.
Just opportunity.
Yeah, it's relational. Exactly. I mean, if God is a person and if he's personal.
What do you want to do today, Lord?
That's it. And so what I hear and what you're saying is that like on the formation side, you're building liturgies or you're building practices that speak to people's formation.
Right.
But because you haven't let go of encounter.
Right.
That encounter can trump formation at any moment.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And and I do think that there's a sense, like some of our standard like vineyard liturgical forms a little bit work against this, right? And so this isn't like a heavy critique. It's just more like an observation. In my church, I'll talk about my church.
Yeah.
So in my church, the standard form is we have about 25 minutes of singing, right? And then we have a break for coffee. People go out and grab their coffee, take their kids to kids' church. Then we have a sermon or announcements and a sermon. And then we have prayer. And during prayer, some of the worship folks will come back and sing some more, right? But that puts an awful lot of burden on that first 20 minutes or 25 minutes of singing to do that formational work. Because at the end of the singing, you've got like, okay, we need to take a break because we got to do the business. We got to get the kids downstairs. And so I've wondered, and I really don't have an answer for this yet. We're going to do an audit in a couple months with our whole pastoral staff to talk about why we do what we do and just hold it before God and just ask, Lord, are there ways we could do this that would be more conducive to formation?
Love that. Wouldn't that be great if every church did an audit every 5 or 6 years?
I think it'd be wonderful. And I give a lot of props to Mark Tyndall, who's our lead pastor. He's been pastoring there for 20 years, celebrating 20 years this November. But for him to say, let's do that, it's a little bit courageous.
It's great.
But I think it's going to help us. And it's also going to force us to ask some hard questions. Like maybe it doesn't help us to pause for coffee. Maybe we need to check kids in for a kids worship service downstairs so we're all the adults are together the whole time or whatever. I don't again,
it could go any direction.
Could go any direction.
I just love that the thought is even there.
Yeah, I think the thought needs to be there. And another thing, in our particular community, we do the Lord's Supper once a month, right?
Yeah, same for us.
Okay. And that I think presents some liturgical challenges, some formational challenges. If I could snap my fingers, well, when we planted Elm City Vineyard, where I could at some level snap my fingers, we did the Lord's Supper every week.
Yeah.
And the reason we did that is that we wanted to integrate that into the invitation for prayer. Everyone always has a response, right? So we would do worship, sermon, and then a response. You either respond with the Lord's Prayer or with the Lord's Supper, and then you go get ministry, or you go straight to ministry, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Just giving people community-based options.
I love that too.
So, these things we're working out.
Yeah, but those things, it's funny. It's like we're not just putting together a hot service,
Right.
air quotes.
Yeah.
But we're taking these elements and it's making people into a particular kind of thing or person.
Exactly. And I think, having people use their bodies is really important in that. It's really important. And I'm like not a kinesthetic guy, really.
Yeah.
I mean, anytime people are even a worship leader's like, hey, clap your hands. I'm like, nope. I'm like,
Don't tell
I'm
me
not
what to
that
do.
kind of guy. But I'm just aware that as we have these, if you want to teach people things at the level of their gut, you have to get their body involved.
It's essential. It is essential. This is one reflection that I've had even about singing worship. I think it's so powerful, not only because we enter into the story with singing, but then when you begin to think about it, lyrics in some ways engage the mind.
Yeah.
Melody touches the heart or the soul of a person. But then to sing, that encapsulates the body.
Brings it together.
So like even to breathe in, to bring air into my lungs and then to pass air over my vocal cords. And when I sing, my entire body is resonating with that, whatever that reality is.
Yeah.
And it's occurred to me that Sunday morning singing might be the only moment in a person's week when they experience true wholeness.
Yeah.
Like heart, mind, body, the whole thing.
Yeah, the full package.
It might be the only moment. It might, and then to direct that towards God.
Yeah.
Well, that's actually maybe the best chance to be healed.
100%. I love that. And to me, I think that's why it's so important that our songs have substance.
Yeah.
And our songs
good ones.
say true things.
Yes.
Right. And this is where, I think it's okay for worship pastors to be a bit choosy and maybe essential to not get caught up in like the hit of the week mentality.
Yeah, just the YouTubeification of worship.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I mean,
there's a lot of great stuff on YouTube.
There's great stuff on YouTube, and there are great songs that are being produced for the mass market.
Yep.
Right? So I'm not against that in general.
Yeah, me either. I get it.
But what I do think we have to do is learn how to tell the truth all the time. Right? I mean,
a challenge.
It's in Ephesians and Colossians when Paul's talking about worship, one of the things that he says is tell the truth to each other, right? Don't lie to each other. And I think it's possible, like if worship songs have, either fluff lyrics in them, or if they have things that are implausible theologically or experientially, I think we might not be telling the truth.
Yeah, it could be an issue.
I think it can be an issue. And so part of the work of a worship pastor, I think, is discernment.
Yeah.
Right? What does my church need to be singing to God? And what does God need to be singing to us through these songs?
Yeah.
And if you think of it that way, I think it's the appropriate level of seriousness.
Yeah, it's got to be huge. Speaking on you just used the word like implausibility in our worship songs. It makes me instantly think of, and this is in a positive light rather than a negative light, but it makes me instantly think of our mutual friend Andy Squires.
I was totally thinking of Andy.
Yeah, because Andy has this song where the third verse is, "You bring the stillborn baby to my shoulder. You bring your sorrow to every fallen soldier. You bring your love to the graves that we stand over."
Yeah.
It's
unbelievable.
Like, and we've been singing that at my church.
Yeah.
And it has so comforted women who have lost their babies.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we're a charismatic church. And one of the things that we've sort of awakened to accidentally over the course of our history is that that's one of those things that touches a lot of families.
Yeah.
And there's no space for that pain or to even to name it.
Yeah.
You know?
Totally. Well, that's something Kathy's written about this on Facebook, so I can say it. But like, that's something we've experienced in our family, with a degree of frequency. And it is true that A, there's not a lot of resourcing there, and B, platitudes are harmful.
Oh,
The thing that I love about Andy's line, "You bring the stillborn baby to my shoulder." And I should say, we didn't experience stillbirth; we experienced miscarriages.
yes.
But the thing that doesn't say is it's very economical. Is my point. He says exactly what's true and leaves it there, right? Which is like, that's where genius writers write. They write best in what they leave out, right? That's the way Bruce Springsteen describes a thing, right? When he's on his game, he says 8 words and it shows you a whole horizon, right? And I would love it if our writers could write that way. That's what the Psalms are like. People complain about what the Bible leaves out, but in some ways that's the art of it,
Yeah.
right?
Amen.
It's like way more John Lee Hooker than Yngwie Malmsteen.
That's for sure. That's for sure. And oh man, that's
Play
a
the
great
note.
reference. That's yes. Play it with conviction.
Play the note.
Come on, man. Play it with conviction. Dude, so good. I think we've probably stirred up enough trouble here.
All right.
All right. I want to ask one more question
Yeah,
because
yeah.
this is the question I'm asking everyone who's on the podcast.
Okay.
And I on purpose didn't give you any idea what this would be. So it can just be like top of mind awareness. I would love for you to maybe just tell me a time when you've experienced like overwhelming joy. And it doesn't have to be the most joy either. It could just be like, it could even be just silliness.
Oh, I got 2.
Okay.
I got
perfect.
2. Okay. So one time I experienced overwhelming joy was the first time that I saw the band Teenage Fan Club play. I could not for the life of me believe that those 4 Scottish guys could make that much harmony.
Man.
I was for sure that it was studio tracking Phil Spector stuff. It's just gift.
Yeah.
They just have gift. And I probably had the goofiest, biggest grin on my
Love it.
face for, 2 hours in the Bowery Ballroom in New York City watching.
How old were you?
It was probably 30 maybe. But just watching creative effervescence. Just
Come on.
gorgeous. So that, and I feel a lot of that way when I see live music.
And just for those of you who are listening to the podcast right now, Caleb has the biggest, goofiest smile on his face right now. So just to even tell the story, even tell the story does the trick.
It's true. Go check out Bandwagon-esque. It'll make you happy.
Yeah.
But then, when the babies are born, I had a moment when Jojo was born, my older child, when he was born and Kathy, had this long labor. Out comes Jojo, and the nurse says, do you want to cut the cord? And what's his name? And that was pretty overwhelmingly joyful too.
It's a great moment.
And but that was joy in a different way because it was weighty.
Yeah.
It was like, this is the joy of life, and this is like you're being given an assignment. This is your assignment.
Yeah.
Go.
And to see your wife like complete that task or whatever, because it's a burden. It's a journey, isn't
She
it?
was a hero. Yeah, it was really, really one of the most amazing days of my life. So
too good.
That'd be another one.
Too good. Too good. All right, man. Hey, thanks for sharing these stories with us.
It's really fun.
Amen.
Let's do it again.
Hey everybody, this is Casey Corum, the producer of the Ferment Podcast. Thanks for listening. I got a couple quick things for you. If you haven't already subscribed, please do so. We've got a bunch of exciting shows coming up, and we don't want you to miss a thing. So, on social media, you can find us on Instagram at the Ferment Podcast, and on Twitter, you can find us at FermentCast. Please let us know what you think of the podcast by leaving a review on iTunes. All right, see you next time. Peace.